Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and tonight I'm joined by this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted. How are you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
I'm doing good. So tonight we are talking about hirelings, but that's not originally how this came about. Some stuff happened in one of our D&D games, as often does. So the next day, Ted's like, "Hey, what do you got? What do you want to talk about? How about we talk about minions?" And I'm thinking the little guys that serve Gru and like this and are very fond of bananas. I'm like, that doesn't feel very D&D esque. And then
Well,
and then so I kind of morphed it into hirelings. I was thinking maybe
so,
hench person, but hirelings works really well.
so you got minions, henchmen, hirelings, companions, all of the things that are essentially part of the adventuring party, but that aren't the player characters, and all of the different nuances that they bring to the table, both mechanically and from a story perspective. And sometimes they can be like a real like hardship on the DM, and sometimes they can be a real hardship on the players when there's so many moving pieces, to look into of, well, mechanically, oh, this dude, has got 8 summoned wolves. Well, his turn is going to be a lot longer, so he's got all these actions to do. Meanwhile, the other players at the table are twiddling their thumbs, waiting for their turn. DM seeing all the frustration. So, like, I figured there's ways to kind of have these discussions, bring it all out together and see what kind of things we can do to improve our tables.
So this isn't about trying to steal away minions from Gru, injecting them into your D&D game.
No, because I pretty much feel like the minions are indestructible. So putting an indestructible series of scads of them together would be very problematic. Sure, they're going to do dumb things and probably get, knocked out of the scene eventually. But it's still very problematic to, try and bring in yellow banana addicted gibberish talking yellow things.
Other things. Well, there's that. But so, this kind of like this was prompted like for whatever reason, over the last few sessions of the game that I'm running currently, you guys are in a dungeon, but you found a way to interact with some of the Desinins in a way that doesn't end in bloodshed and violence. After a whole
Yeah.
lot of bloodshed and violence. Well, now you guys kind of started off with a little bit of friendliness, went into like a tsunami of bloodshed and violence, and then brought it back down to uh peaceful interactions, sort of.
Right. So now, mind you, this party is composed of an artificer, a sorcerer, and for the most part, 3 barbarians. Intelligence was not the strong suit of the party, and it wasn't until a conveniently placed and luckily rolled uh, helm of intellect stumbled upon the party that we had more than one person with a positive modifier to intelligence. So the party's been a bit of a chaos mix.
Now, you guys, up until this point, right? The party had already they got an artificer, so that means there's a homunculus in the crew, as well as a iron defender. Um, and then recently, you guys made friends with some Myconids, and
Yes.
the Myconids allowed you to guys to actually have a negotiation and fairly peaceful interaction after some pseudopod slugfesting with a small colony of mimics. And you guys were like, it would be super cool to understand and know about mimics and learn their culture and how they interact with each other and their way advanced society. Um, and you're like, but the only way to do that is if one of these Myconids hangs out with us. And also, like after a few hours, you're like, oh, they really don't have much on their mind other than
Yeah, it's pretty much food or I'm not hungry yet. But you know, that's this particular group. But we already put forth the thought that was out there. So my ingenious mind was like, all right, what can we do with these guys? And if nothing else, maybe there'll be something to be had of it later. But the only way to carry along the mimic is to bring a mic in it. Now, out of our product, the Mage Forge, my character has an item called the Mirror of Vanity. So that means I always have advantage on persuasion and deception checks. and I'm a sorcerer. So for me, persuasion is at a +9. I'm really good at it. And then you couple that with advantage, that's sitting pretty.
Right.
So
So,
we have a conversation with the Myconids.
real quick, right? Ted's like, can I try and convince these Myconids? And, he has the conversation like I said. Can I try and convince these Myconids to come with me? And I know he's like really good at it, but I'm like, it's gonna be disadvantaged because they've known you guys for all of like 5 minutes, and just like death and destruction has gone everywhere you guys have gone, and it seems like a really dangerous idea. And so Ted's like, okay, okay. It's not really a big deal. It just means he has to roll without advantage.
Right.
Then he's like, and then he's like, well, now I want to convince a mimic to travel with us. He's like, disadvantage again? I was like, no, you have like super advantage. Like, you guys have food, so much food, and it's all they care about. Matter of fact, your problem wasn't whether you could get one mimic to come with you.
It was the only one. So what was amusing is like, I rolled against the Myconids, and out of the dozen of them, 8 of them raised their hands, like, I'll go. I was that convincing. Then I had to pretty much, convince the mimics that we only really need one of you. So we had to kind of workshop that. And ironically, that was almost went bad because I rolled 3 dice because Dave gave me the super advantage there. And I know that's not a thing that ever should really happen in D&D, but you
Unless you have
know,
the lucky feat and you have disadvantage, I think is how it works.
or you've got, elven accuracy
Mhm.
kind of nonsense. But we did it anyway, just for the sheer hilarity of it. But I dropped like a 2, a 3, and a 9. So like I still only got an 18. But it was like 18 was my best. They're like, that's all you rolled? I'm like, sorry guys, look at the dice.
Yeah. But also the DC was really low. Like, you were speaking their language with food, and that they weren't gonna have to really work for it.
But so we started off, just having conversations, and Dave was like, "All right, you fed these guys quite a lot, so we're gonna turn these into sidekicks." I wasn't expecting, that kind of process. I was expecting like this to be a challenge of, all right, well, we need to keep these things alive or out of combat kind of thing. And I know how I run uh minions in games, and it's pretty much it's like if you don't have them do combat, they're pretty much going to be safe from it. Um, so I wasn't really planning on pushing these guys into the combat and trying to be useful in that direction. Uh, and it 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 didn't necessarily stay that way as the game went on.
Yeah, so I've actually used like my own version of like sidekick rules before there were sidekick rules. I mean, way back in the Scarlet Sisterhood, um, Robin had a dog. It was just a dog, a regular
Mhm.
riding dog out of the player's handbook. And I'm like, well, this thing is gonna die if we don't do something. And they're very attached to it, right? And
Yep.
the player, in addition to the character, and also like I don't like taking away the fun things from the player. So I was like, well, what can we do to make sure that this companion is a little bit more survivable? So we kind of basically made it almost like a ranger companion, which are fairly weak anyway. Again, a lot of the times, kind of didn't have Monty do anything dangerous, with the caveat being whenever something happened to Kenna where they weren't able to um control Monty, I took control. And I did what I felt the animal would do, not what the player wanted it to do.
Right.
Like it was always going to strive to protect and defend Kenna,
Mhm.
right? And Kenna was way more capable than Monty. So, but so that being said, like, so if I and also like I had asked the players for a bunch of roles in order to make this stuff happen, and in addition to that, like we had role playing going back and forth, and also with the mic in it, there was a little bit of a negotiation going. hey, we'll do this, but he can only serve you for 1 year, and he's got to get paid when he comes back. He's got to bring stuff back to the tribe, and we'll give
Yep.
you somebody else if you want. Um, so so that it facilitated quite a bit of role playing and maybe some future role playing, possibly. And since I did that, like, I don't want these NPCs to just be throwaways. And so I was like, well, how about we look at the new sidekick rules and see what they look like? And I was basically like, listen, merge the monster stat block with with the sidekick stat block to kind of like make a balanced version of that thing, right?
Yep.
So it adds to the survivability, but only so much so, right? Like anything that would really hurt you guys is almost fatal to them.
Well, the expert at level 10 has 60 hit points, and the warrior's got 75. So like they're not exactly pushovers.
Nah, they're not
Um,
pushovers, but like big spell effects or big monster effects that would hurt you guys.
mhm.
You guys are pushing like double their hit points.
I
So
mean, with my character having the epic boon of fortitude, before I rolled my 11th level hit points, or before I gave him the 11th level hit points, he's got got 103 hit points. So
yeah,
it's pretty impressive for a sorcerer.
yeah, for a spellcaster. Yeah. So again, and like you guys tend to like have those things not as active when it comes to combat and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, where with the Steel Defender and Homunculus, they get used a lot more, but also they're fairly easy to bring back.
Right.
Where if something happens to the mimic, it's just going to be good that, or, you know, or you guys are going to have to like use real resources and figure out how to resurrect it. Or
Yeah, and I don't know how much the party is into that, and I don't think we've got a revivify in any way, shape, or form in this party.
no, no,
So
it's not that kind of party. You guys barely heal.
it's like, well, we've got hit dice and long rest. Like, isn't that how we do this? I honestly, I debated, not that not that it's anytime coming, but one of the players kind of like was hanging out, and because we've got some multi-class scenarios, there was some feat selection to be had, and it got me thinking. I'm like, I could technically take cure wounds, but I don't want to turn my character into the cleric. Uh, but I mean, it would have to be, when I hit level 12, which since we just hit level 11, I'm like, I don't know if that's actually going to happen. So,
Yeah. Well, cure wounds with what? But with magic initiate or something.
yeah, if I took magic initiate or any of those kind of like spells that, get you access, but you learn the spell, because then I could use, my sorcery spell slots to cast that spell. But I'm a battle caster. I'm not supposed to be the healer. So
So I was just just reading the chat. So Averon says, okay, if the player is going to have a companion, pet, familiar, or sidekick, use the help action every time. That is when I said the friendly is at risk. So yeah, if it does anything super beneficial to the party during conflict, it is definitely a viable target at that point.
yeah, I view it, if you are active, like we have our homunculus actually using magic items. We actually have the some things even on our our iron defender. If you're using magic items and doing damage or even healing in combat, that that creates a target. If in my games, if you have a companion, whether it be a mount, a sidekick, a hireling, or just a pet, if you have them involved in the combat in any way, shape, or form, short of like, all right, they're gonna just move out of the area of influence, then they're gonna be at risk. Attacks are gonna happen, and death can happen. Like when when my daughter's ranger companion got dropped, like she was distraught. And it's like, dude, you're a ranger. All you have to do is spend a first level spell slot and poof, your companion's back. She's like, oh, okay. Like she
A-
was getting like
After
upset and mad
after
at
you let
me.
her cry for a little while, like a day or two, but then you explain.
It was like 2 minutes, and that's because she wouldn't count down.
Mm. Listen, if you don't make a child cry, are you really playing Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh my god. It, it was not my intent to try and make my daughter
Mm.
cry. It's just, it's part of the game. Like you put your frog in combat and it's going to get squished.
Well, I remember the first time a player actually cried in the game, and I was like, "What? What are you doing? Are you okay? Why? Your face is leaking. What's going on here? There is no crying in D&D." No, and they're like, "No, no, it's good. It's emotional, so I like it." I'm like, "Okay," but it's a bit of a different experience than we're used to at that
Sure,
time,
sure, sure.
anyway. Um, so the way we usually do our do like the hirelings too is for any NPC really, at least the way I do it. I think Ted pretty much does the same thing. Is I always give them to the players, and then if they want to role play with them, then I'll do the role playing. But I basically make them, I let them make all the decisions for the NPC as long as they don't do anything crazy like. Like if you're playing a modern or futuristic game and there's someone throws a grenade and they're like, "We want our hireling loves us is going to throw themselves on the." That's when I'm going to step in and be like, "No, actually, they had a premonition that something bad was going to happen, and they tied your boot
I
laces
feel like
together."
deja vu. You've said
Yeah,
all of this already.
not during the chat though. Uh, and then they push you on it. So like, as long as they're not being stupid with them, I'm like, go at it. And also too, as a GM, I feel like we have enough to worry about and control with all of the other NPCs and monsters and every adversaries.
I would wholeheartedly agree. There is enough in the world for me to control, unless like unless I have got some secret motivation with an NPC that he has to act on like at a specific time, then no, if it's a hireling, off. You do your thing. You completely control it. Um, you know, but other than that, I'm like, nope, I'm good. I got all these monsters and the rest of the world over here that are my little puppets.
But you guys didn't stop with a Mike and Ed and a
No,
Mimic.
we went on to our next encounter where we uh were vastly outnumbered by the 12 bugbears and 15 goblins that wanted us to join their banner.
Yeah. Oh, don't forget, there's also a Goblin boss and the Bugbear Chieftain who was in
Okay, so
charge.
all right, so there was essentially 29 uh things in this encounter. It was a bit crazy. And when I saw the numbers, I'm like, all right, I think maybe we should have a conversation here. And again, since that's something that my character excels at, first thing they're like, oh, we don't like the common tongue. We want to speak in goblin. And I'm like, well, we happen to have a goblin here. And we just kind of push him to the front. And after a little bit of back and forth and some uh not everything being properly translated, it all
By your
came
side,
to
not by their side.
yeah, they initially, were thinking, oh well, since there's, less than 10 of you, we're 3 times your number, so you should just join our banner and do what we say. And we're like, that ain't gonna freaking happen. So it winds up getting into like a champion fight, which was over very, very quickly.
Yeah, it was rather sad for my Bugbear Chieftain. I mean, granted, it's a 10th level barbarian versus a CR 2 or 3.
That's all it was.
Yeah.
So we had no idea like what this confrontation was going to look like. So like the goblinoids were all like huddled together and talking, and I guess going through their strategy. So we pull our goblin barbarian, who's like a way of the beast and has a a bona fide wyvern tail affixed to his back. Uh, so I don't know if our artificer cast anything or not, but I'm like, all right, well, I'm definitely gonna soup this guy up, and I drop a haste on the barbarian, and then the barbarian, our guy, our goblin, wins initiative. So before the bad guy even has a chance to do anything, he gets killed. He's just utterly brutalized with a couple of clubs and a wyvern tail to the midsection. It was over.
Yeah. They're like, well, yep. You are now the chief of the Singing Blades, and all of his possessions now belong to you. And also
Including his harem.
and any of his family members are now yours to execute. And they're like, you guys are like, are there any family members here? He's got 2 cousins. And they're like, oh crap. And they're like, we're not going to execute you, but you have to come with us. So now they have 2 bugbears tagging along, and they are just regular.
Yeah, so we don't expect those guys to survive, but they've also not done anything as of yet. The whole point of bringing them along was because the tribe was not willing to show us where the lake is that we're looking for. So we pretty much bully these bugbears. It's like, well, we could kill you, or you can show us where it is that we want to go. And they're like, all right, we'll take you.
Yeah. So the goblins are all being magically compelled. But I figured the 2 that are like, well, die now or die later are going to take the die later. So that allowed them to break their compulsion at least a little bit and hope for the best.
And hope for the best.
The outlook is rather bleak. Yeah. So now you guys have bolstered your ranks to 4 hirelings.
Four hirelings. So we've got 5 party members, 2 essentially companions, 7. So like we're sitting at a solid 11 people strong, moving through, this dungeon. We've all told encountered friendly myconids, friendly mimics. We've slaughtered like 11 ogres, a
I would
dozen.
say you've encountered hungry mimics. So depending on whether you
Okay,
feed them or not determines their
sure,
friendliness.
sure. Uh well, they eventually became friendly to us. Shall we put it that way? We've slaughtered a handful of Duergar and fire newts riding their fire chickens. Uh, we've handled a couple of fire giants and some crazed radiant energy ninja Darrow. I don't know exactly what they were, but holy shit, they did 116 points of damage to my sorcerer before he had a chance to act.
The Darrow savants. They're basically like sorcerers. They've got like one move. It's not a bad move because it always hits, right? It's just whether you do full damage or half
Right.
damage. And if you roll enough saving throws, you probably will foul, 1 or 2. Even though the DC was kind of low, but it's also was Dex, and that's not really a good, that's not like one of your stats. So,
Right.
uh,
Yeah, you got to give me counter charisma. That I'm golden on.
yeah,
But
yeah.
Dex,
To me, it made,
uh,
it made sense because at the time you were polymorphed into a cataplepa. That seemed
I
like the scariest thing out there to me.
sure. Yeah, I was a catablepus and what have you, and dear Lord, that I didn't do the most damage to those fire giants. I don't know what they had seen, but whether they rolled on the scene after the fire giants or what, but I I was not enjoying that fight in the slightest. 84 hit point pool was the only way that I walked out of that encounter alive.
Well, after they dropped you, they would have stopped firing you anyway. But also, like, the rest of the Darrow are extremely weak. And literally, the only reason that they hit is because they had stealthed in and had advantage. And
Mm.
they really didn't hit that many times for as many of them as there were. So, who knows? We'll see if you guys rack up any more hirelings in this dungeon or not.
Well,
I didn't
I'm
see that coming.
I it wasn't my plan going in, but I have no problems, attracting some more fodder and either straight up bullying or persuading people to you know, rally to us or die. Because I don't think we can fight everything that's in here. It's not going to be fun.
So, personal account in the chat wants to know what do you consider the most surreal monster in D&D?
I mean, how do you define surreal? Like, uh like do you mean like peaceful? Do you mean otherworldly? Like,
I'm not sure how they mean it. So I guess fantastical, unbelievable.
so I mean, there are plenty of things that fall into the just what the hell moments when it comes to D&D monsters, because some things are just
Bizarre.
completely, there's some things that are just utterly alien looking. um if you want to go uh with the most bizarre, then I'm going to say from a perspective of visuals and perspective, I'm gonna have to go with mind flayers. They are incredibly intelligent, incredibly powerful,
I have to
and
go way back to AD.
all right, what are you going with?
Um, so it is so stupid and ridiculous. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing, what it's called.
Okay,
It is a stump with a growth on top of it. It looks like a stump with a growth on top of it. The growth looks like a bunny rabbit.
okay.
And basically, or it can be like some other kind of like furry little creature. Uh, and it just waits for things to approach it so that it can attack it. Like that is probably one of the most ridiculous. I mean, there's also the flump as well.
I can get behind the flump, the ridiculous farting pancake that floats through the Underdark. I mean, we even made a really cool story involving flumps, last spring. Um, you know, so like I can deal with that one. Um, I just look at the straight up mindset of what it takes to be a mind flayer, to be so far above everything else in the Underdark. I mean, technically, all the things that have power in the Underdark think that they're the most superior. Um, but the Mind Flayer has grown beyond just the humanoid you know aspect, even though I know they're aberrations. Having the intellect devours and the oozes and the elder brain, like the all encompassing illithid arc is getting bigger and bigger, and now we have the freaking elder brain dragon. It's like, all right, I am really on board with this mind flayers taking over the Underdark with all their nonsense. You can
So
do an awful lot with it.
now I say they also use a lot of like minions and henchmen, uh, but they don't pay them. They're actually just thralls. But I will say, like to me, I actually say because there's so many of them, and at this point you can just be like, oh, that's Cthulhu shit, right? Like there's like a whole category for now for that
Sure.
kind of stuff. So I find it less bizarre because of that, right? It's all kind of
Okay.
Cthulian in nature, or if you're looking at in D&D terms, Pharaoh. It's all very cool, and I love that kind of stuff. Those weird monsters. but in some ways to me they've become less bizarre and less weird because they have this like niche that they kind of fit into, and it's been expanding ever since the
Sure.
actually before the game, right? Because really a lot of that shit is just inspired by Cthulhu.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that aspect, but to kind of like sit with that conversation, that's where I have to go. Like, I don't, sure, a stump monster, uh, developing the ability to have a facsimile of a small beast, whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, that's bizarre, but is it the most bizarre? I don't know about
Well,
that.
what about the Obelix? And I really, Avron, you made me think of that because you're like the big ass fish from SpongeBob with the old lady as a tongue talking to the would be dinner is literally an Obelix.
Well, isn't the Obelix the ooze that the mind flayers make?
I don't know if they made them or not, or if they're their own thing, but
Well, I know they're connected.
it's a newer it's a newer monster, and when they kill things, they have the ability to absorb their memories and basically make
Yeah, I
like appendages that look like them.
yeah, I used Obelixes as like the main villain behind my haunted
Yeah.
house at the second time I did D&D in a castle.
Bro,
And
bro, don't
I
talk to me about Obelixes. I literally had an Obelix use one of my players' daughters.
well, I wasn't up on the lore, in depth when I
Yeah.
had ran them, because it was like, my one of my players was like, "Hey, you said you weren't doing anything with mind flayers. That's what you did last time." And I'm like, "What? I'm not. I'm using oozes." They're like, "It says right here." And like they called me on it, after the last session. I'm like, "Well, I'll be."
Yeah, I actually don't remember if their connection to mind flayers. So their mind flayers spawned.
In some way, shape, or form. It's been like a year and a half, 2 years since that campaign was ran, but they're definitely connected to illithids in some way, shape, or form.
What about? Do you remember? I don't think they have a version of this in 5e, but do you remember Deep Spawn,
Yeah,
where they basically just vomit out monsters?
yeah, they were a ton of fun to run around and play with.
And I feel like that it's as far as like weird monsters go, bizarre monsters, and the henchman connection is perfect because they just can constantly vomit out monsters that are under their control. Like you just need one of them to populate a dungeon.
So before we go any further, we are past the halfway point here. So I will say that we always got to mention that this chat and the our weekly live chats are sponsored by Easy Roller Dice. So whether it's your first set of dice or your 1 million set of dice, Easy Roller Dice for all your dice rolling needs. There's a promo code and a link down in the description to go get 25% off your first order. They always got new dice coming out. They always got fabulous dice. So do yourself and them a favor, and go buy some cool dice and tell them Nerdarchy sent you.
That was one of our quickest midstream pitches yet. So also you'll find some other links down there like to we're going to be doing a Kickstarter for our own RPG Zoo Mafia. We tried once and it did not succeed, but you know what they say, first you don't succeed, try again. That's exactly what we're going to do. So with that, let's jump right back into the discussion.
So, do you have any more things on henchmen and the like before I you know turn this topic on its heels?
All right, you want to go into your 4E tirade. Go ahead.
Yeah. So initially when I presented the idea of minions to Dave, I'm like, I'm gonna turn this around and I'm gonna surprise people. Because I feel while fourth edition failed in a lot of directions, because most people who I've talked to say it didn't really feel like D&D. It's a good rule set, but it was missing something, or something just wasn't right. Uh, but there's a lot of cool concepts from fourth edition, and some things didn't really cross over into 5e. And one of those aspects was minions. Those monsters that are powerful, have a high armor class, high damage output, but essentially, like, they got one hit point. If they pass their saving throw, they're fine. But if, like, you do damage to them, they're gone. Like, I feel that's something that would have the ability to make 5e a little bit more threatening for the player characters, and so many people say, like, it's on easy mode. I think having more encounters where, like, you can have a lot of guys that hit hard but die quick, I think could be really flipping cool.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the disappointing things that did not carry over from 4E, because it was a cool concept of, like, how do you have large scale cinematic battles that aren't just complete slogfests and meaningless, right? So, like, you could throw a bunch of goblins and orcs at the players, and yes, you get the cool one shot, but they really aren't going to be a threat. They're just, it's annoying. But and at the same, and also the same token, like, I think where it really shined was the idea of, oh, you're facing off against, say, devils and the hosts of hell, right? Well, you can't just use a bunch of devils, right? Like, again, there are ones that are scrubby enough that they're not a real threat and the players can mow through them. But that's also not very satisfying to the players, because they're not a threat. And if you use something that they can't just mow through, well, then it becomes more of a problem. And it's just going to be a slog fest. And even if they can win, it's going to be ugly. Where minions filled that gap nicely, like you said, they had an armor class and an attack that was that was um on par with the level of the party and could be threatening, but also they could mow through them and it could feel very cinematic. Like, you want to be like, the Avengers movie Age of Ultron, where you have all the Ultrons attacking, right? And you have the ability, they are a threat, but also you can take them out, right? You want that feel to it. And Corey found a nice way of bridging that wasn't brought back. I mean, there's so many things from 4E that should have been brought back into the core rule. That being one of them. Also,
Bloodied.
Bloodied is also a really good game mechanic, just letting people, and skill challenges. Although they've worked their way back into 5e, but it's not no, I don't think official. I don't think that there's anything that officially calls it how they work. Everyone, they've worked their way back in from people like us who like using from 4A, and then, like, oh, this is kind of cool, let's put that in. So there's a couple things like that. So yes, and I've even used minions in 5e, because it's really easy to make a minion out of existing monsters. But, like, you say, what if 5e is your first edition of D&D, or you skipped 4e for whatever reason, then you didn't have you don't have that experience to draw upon. So it would be nice that, if they were to put those back in.
Yeah. And I feel like that was kind of my kind of sneaky dirty way of being like, all right, while I felt like everybody else that 4E wasn't my game of choice, it was a substantial building block for where we are now, and some of the cool features that we just don't have here. So I figured I would definitely take that time and be like, all right, we need to discuss this. So you know, we should really figure out a way to write some kind of 5e rule set of how do you make a minion? How do you do this? Whether we do it as a blog post, or newsletter article or what have you. I think that could be beneficial for those people who haven't had that that aspect before.
So, do you think this is going to be a new thing for your party, collecting hirelings?
I think it's going to be a thing for the time being. Uh I'm a little worried that not having the forethought of like, okay, well, what happens when we get back to our bikes? I like I said, I don't foresee the bugbears making it back to the bikes. Um,
Yeah,
but I'm fairly certain that we can get Mikey without a problem, but I don't know how we're gonna like can can Chompy just kind of adhere to the bike in some way, shape, or form? And will that work? Like, or does he have to be eating it? And I don't want him eating our bikes.
I guess you guys are going to find that out.
Um,
See what you guys got. You got an artificer. He can artifice something, maybe. Yeah, a
um,
single wheel that he has to balance on.
I think we'll find some way to
Mm.
to make it work, or
The mimic's going to turn into a sidecar. Maybe a chest with wheels,
a chest with wheels, and then Mikey can ride him.
also known as luggage.
But either way, like I don't feel that Vel, my character, has got any kind of necessary attachment to either of these characters. They're sure. I think it could be beneficial if we learn from each other, but emotionally, he's not like oh my god, I've got to save these things. Ted cares more about these things than Vel does. Uh,
I think one of the players wanted to try and get the mimic to turn into armor. Although I don't think that's going to work out very great for the mimic.
No, I wouldn't think so. I also don't think like it's going to work out too well with the player. Like, all right, the mimic takes damage. Oh my god, it's hurt. It's going to start eating you. You are already inside it.
So we also haven't talked about hirelings used to be a huge part of the game back in like
Mhm.
AD&D. Also your player characters were disposable. Hirelings were disposable. Like you needed someone to carry the torch or a lantern, so you would just hire a hireling to do it. Someone had to work the 10-foot pole, so just hire a hireling to do it. It was a much bigger part of the game back in the day. Also
Yeah,
there
I
was
don't.
less role playing with them, so they were more like just pieces on the board.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of experience with that style of play. Do you have any interesting memories or moments where like that kind of stuff came out, whether it be some kind of emotional connection or like you know a brutal situation that happened?
So I wouldn't say emotional connection, especially like in like my earliest gaming days. Like in the beginning, it tended to be. It was still more like the war game, in a sense that it was more tactical. Not tactical in the way like third edition was, where it's like moving squares on the board and things of that nature. In AD&D in first edition, it was more like the GM would create problems and puzzles to challenge the players. Where nowadays, like those same things would challenge the character, and you have like things on your character sheet to try and overcome these obstacles. Where back then it would be more like, you carried a 10-foot pole because you were trying to figure out, well, how can I trigger traps before we get to them? Or, your characters were so much squishy, so you would try and sneak past monsters instead of fighting them, you know, because you were a lot more likely to just get squished. And thankfully, you had a hireling with you because then that would become your character, right? And also, you would just go through hireling rather quickly. You go back to town, you'd buy some more hirelings or hire more hirelings. You shouldn't buy people wrong. And then you go back into the dungeon. When you came back, you would probably need to hire more hirelings. So I had a little bit of experience with that. I feel like it was almost like the generation before me that was playing was doing that. Because I did more of my playing probably like mid '80s, and I was still, we were still pretty young then, teens, and what our understanding of a role playing game at that time was very imperfect.
I mean, I look at my early days of role playing, and even at the time frames where I had evolved and worked with you, like not worked with, but like gamed with you. I I didn't learn the joy of in depth player character conversations until much later in my my gaming history. It was sure it was a role playing game, and while we talked in character, it was almost exclusively to the NPCs, but it was far more about the strategy and the combats and the overall story. Sure, there was lore, but the RP was like the lowest on the pillars. And now I feel like it's that's kind of pushed towards the top, as I've like highly enjoyed games where like the RP is all of it, or most of it. It's like, all right, sure, there's a little bit of combat and exploration, but for the most part, let's just develop these characters in this world and see what happens. And I'm like, yeah, I can certainly dig this.
Do you feel like we should be using more hirelings in our games, and have that element of the game, even if we don't use like sidekick rules per se?
Sure. So I feel like that really depends upon the story that you're wanting to tell. You know, do you live an adventure in a world where adventurers are this thing on a pedestal, and you have to earn your right to become an adventurer? And maybe that's the step. Like, okay, well, before you're truly like a level one character, have you done something as a hireling? Have you encountered, all this, horrific things to happen, seen great rewards that you don't really get a share of? Like I feel that could be an interesting element, and another like slice of your backstory, if you will, to be like, well, yeah, I hired out for 3 months, 6 months, what have you, with this one adventuring party, and oh, we went and explored the dungeons of blah blah blah, and this is what my character saw, this is what my character did. You could have a whole lot more trauma, and you could have more knowledge of why your character understands some more of the world.
So,
You know,
what about this? Right, I had two trains of thoughts here. One, what kind of tools can you put in the DM's toolbox just by having hirelings in? And two, based off of what you just said, should there or should there not be a hireling background?
I think we'd absolutely could create a hireling background.
Like a
Um,
variant for folk hero, maybe?
sure. Um, it could really be, you could put just about anything justifiably in there. Um, you know, uh, I'm trying to keep this conversation going without thinking about how I would write this up. Um, but I think that could create some really cool stories of like, well, if you were a hireling, what would that mean? You could have a more deeper story. You could have it where, oh, other adventurers that are successful. Maybe you've got a good relationship with them. Maybe you don't. Like you've got these elements to kind of draw on and look at, and it could be an awful lot of fun to kind of go and play in that direction.
So I'm also thinking like what kind of tools can we kind of, as a GM, use the um use the hirelings for, right? Like, how often you hear people going like, "Oh, I wish I could get my players to role play more in game or role play with each other more." Um, and I'm thinking like, well, what if you use hirelings in your game, right? To role play with your players. To also, like, you could use them in some ways to um like, if you use that hireling that's worked for other adventurers, then it didn't go so well, and they just happen to
Mhm.
be like one of the survivors. So like you could impart information that way. Maybe even like, a lot of times players want to make checks, and I don't know if necessarily they should be making the check or not. Like for almost anything, of like players, can I
Right.
arcana that? Can I history that? But what if you were to let them do that, and instead of them like knowing the answer, the NPC chimes in uh and kind of gives them, the like what they were looking
Their
for. Like,
hot take.
yeah, or a piece of what they were looking for.
Sure. So I also feel like, we talk a lot about, we even did a video on the campfire, talk, role playing your rests and that kind of stuff. Um, but some players, they write intricate backstories, and sometimes it's so that, oh, they know what's going on for them, but sometimes it's like, shit, man, I want this talked about, I want this to come out in game. And if the other player characters aren't actually doing anything, like, you could have that hireling, in order to try and keep themselves alive, they have the wherewithal of like, hey, if I develop some kind of rapport with these people, perhaps they'll like me and make sure that I survive. So I'm going to be inquisitive. I'm going to ask questions, and they'll sit back and try to talk to the party every time they sit down for a short rest, every time we should sit down for a long rest, engage the group. Let's have a hearty, heart to heart, and ask questions. And sometimes just asking the one question to one person is going to start a whole dialogue across the whole table. And you've done your homework as the DM of starting the ball rolling, and now you don't have to, do anything more than sit back and let them, handle their interaction.
Unless they insist on continuing to speak directly to your hireling.
Sure, and that's a possibility of it as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but if you're looking as the DM to kind of help that player get that out there, and the other characters seem engrossed in the conversation, then sure, it's still going to be a player to NPC conversation, but it's still a scenario of the players getting their desserts because it's their stories coming out, which, I don't always care that my story, is a part of it, because I'm more often writing the backstory so that I know who my character is. But sometimes it's like, no, this would be cool if this happened. Um,
So
so
kind of building off of something you said, if you can get the players to build a rapport, or if you can get the hireling to build a rapport with your players and characters, you can then also start using the hireling for adventure hooks too, right? Like, they could get a missive from back home and there's a problem, they've got to go, like, um and maybe they're very concerned. Well, if they have a genuine rapport with the players characters, the adventuring party, you would think maybe they would want to help them, right? And then also, so you can bring them into some pieces of the hirelings personal life and world when it has to go back to the farm, and for whatever reason, the cows are being eaten, whatever. But now, instead of it just being like, hey, here's a couple gold pieces to go help this poor farmer out, instead they're helping their friend out, who's
right.
been going on adventures with them. Now, and I
So
also, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say those are things that are great tools as a DM, to kind of have at the ready. That's
So also I remember like back in the day having a couple hirelings, and after things like happening in the game, like being like, oh, well, they power up now? Do they level up with us? And like having to introduce those rules. And also
mm,
like in AD&D, a big part of it was when you hit certain levels, you started attracting followers and hirelings essentially, right? Your charisma score determined how many hirelings you could actually hire, and feasibly manage. Right? If your charisma score wasn't high enough, you couldn't get any hirelings because no one liked you enough to work for you. Maybe we need to bring back the hireling stat for charisma.
oh man,
Um,
Vel will be sitting pretty.
now I'm kind of curious to what that stat was back in AD&D. But it just was a much bigger part of the game. But I can also see why um it was kind of removed, because it takes the focus off the players directly and their
Mhm.
characters.
Right.
And back then there wasn't quite as much role playing, like you said, especially with each other. It was, there was story there, but like the story, a lot of times, um would be what happened, at the table, right? And like, per se, like you guys go into the dungeon, and then after you go into the dungeon, like that was the kind of the story. Where now it's like there's a story arc, there's plots and beats that you're working towards, right? And this overarching storyline, and the GM might have a lot of that already developed, and the players kind of fit into it and help build that narrative. Where before, say it was less of a narrative and more of a, here's the story of what we did. That If that makes sense.
Completely.
I'm trying to see if I can if I find the charisma chart, because now I'm kind of curious.
So
Um,
while you're
yeah, what were you saying?
so while you're looking that up, I'm gonna kind of jump into the chat personal account. How do you make NPCs failed roles comedic, if at all? I use anime, etchy humor. Great way to use hirelings and allow PCs to redeem villains or corrupt heroes, NPCs, depending upon the party's alignment. Um, so if you are gonna use henchmen, hirelings, and that kind of stuff, and they are designed to add humor to your game, you're doing something that's a bit more brutal and involved in you know more anime comedic style. Sure, you can have, oh, as a hireling, or some merc, they don't have the ability to go to negative half health. They don't have the ability to make death saving throws. Like, you hit zero, they're just dead. You can be utterly brutal, which means, like, oh well, when the trap goes off and they take acid damage, they literally dissolve right before your eyes. Their head is melted off, or their arm is just gone, and the bones scattered to the ground. Like, you can be utterly horrific or completely comedic with your descriptions, you know as much as you really want, just depending upon what your goal is. um but if you're looking for that comedic or horrific, I think that's a good way to go, is to there's no pass and go, there's no chance of redemption, they're just gone.
So in AD&D, based on your charisma, you could have 1 to 15 henchmen, and then you also had a loyalty based, dependent upon your charisma score. So you could always, even if you had the lowest of low charisma, you could have at least just one head.
There you go.
They might betray you because you have a negative loyalty score, but you could have them.
All right. So what does a 20 charisma look like?
Dude,
Or is it
this was AD&D, man. It went up to 18.
went up to 18? All right. So 18, I could have 15 henchmen.
You could have 15 henchmen and a plus 40% to their loyalty skill. And I think in the DMG there was like probably even more charts to determine what things made them more or less loyal to you. Depending on like things in the game, it would add percentages.
And how you treated them.
Yeah, and how you treated them, of course. So it's kind of funny. Personal account brings up Jim Davis from WebDM got around the charisma hireling problem by paying them double. More money always helps, even if like who hasn't had the boss that they didn't like, but they paid the money. There.
There's always that aspect of, oh, they pay me, so I guess I will deal with this.
Yes, I will deal with this. So it is just past 9 o'clock, but do not fret. We'll be back Tuesday night at 8:30 with our Dungeons and Delving game. So come back and join us then.
And it's gonna be a real hoot.
So join us then, and we'll be back here next week doing the same thing. So until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.
You threw me off because I